Hey everyone, this is Taehyung. Not V, not the artist you've seen smiling on stage, just Taehyung. The son of a woman who used to hold my hand every morning before school, and the same woman who once told me, if you marry him, don't ever come back home. Even now, saying those words out loud still makes my chest tighten. Because no matter how far I go, no matter how much I try to convince myself that I'm fine, the echo of her voice still lives somewhere in the back of my mind. Soft, trembling, and filled with something deeper than anger. I grew up in Daegu, surrounded by the warmth of family dinners, the smell of my mom's kimchi jjigae bubbling on the stove, and the laughter of my grandmother echoing through the hallway. We weren't rich, but we had love, and for me, that was everything. My mother always told me, Taehyung, no matter what happens, always choose kindness. I believed her. I built my entire life around that sentence. But what happens when kindness means breaking her heart? What happens when love itself becomes the reason your home shuts its doors on you? I remember the day everything changed. It was winter, that kind of cold that cuts through your jacket and crawls under your skin. I had just finished a late night recording session in Seoul. He was waiting for me in the car, quietly scrolling through his phone, his face lit by the soft glow of the streetlights. When I opened the door, he smiled that same smile that always made the world feel a little less heavy. We didn't talk much during the drive. We didn't need to. Our silence was the kind that said more than words ever could. But that night, I made a decision. I was going to tell my mom the truth. Not as an idol, not as her successful son, but as her child who had fallen in love with someone she never expected. When I called her the next morning, her voice was calm. Too calm. Taehyung, what is it? She asked. I told her everything about him, about us, about how it wasn't a phase, and how I couldn't imagine living a lie anymore. There was a long silence on the phone, so long that I thought maybe the line had disconnected. And then she said it. If you marry him, don't ever come back home. It didn't sound like hate. It sounded like fear. Fear of what people would say, fear of what the neighbors might whisper, fear that her son, the pride of the family, would become the subject of pity or scandal. I could hear her trying not to cry, and in that moment, I didn't know whether to comfort her or protect myself. After that call, I sat on the floor of my apartment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the kind of emptiness that fame can't fill. The phone kept buzzing texts, notifications, interviews, but all I wanted was one message from her saying, come home. It never came. For weeks, I tried to distract myself. Photo shoots, rehearsals, fan meetings. I smiled, posed, laughed, but every time someone shouted Taehyung from the crowd, I felt like they were calling out to someone who didn't exist anymore. He noticed, of course, he always did. He didn't push me to talk. A quiet, patient, like the world's gentlest shadow. Sometimes, late at night, he'd make me tea and say, you don't have to choose between love and family. You just have to be you. But how do you explain to someone that being yourself is what breaks your family apart? One night, I couldn't sleep. The moonlight spilled across the living room floor, and I sat there scrolling through old photos on my phone. Me as a kid, smiling next to my mom in our small Daegu house. Her arms were always around me. I remember how she'd tuck my hair behind my ear, how she'd hum that old trot song while folding laundry. I could almost hear it again that night. I wanted to call her so badly, but I was scared she'd pick up and that I'd hear that same cold distance again. So instead, I wrote her a letter. Not as Taehyung the idol, but as her son, the boy who still missed the sound of her voice calling him Tae-ah. In that letter, I told her everything. I told her how love doesn't choose gender or fame or convenience. It just happens. I told her how much I missed home, how I still remember the smell of the steamed rice she used to cook, how I still prayed for her health before every flight. I told her that even if she never accepted him, I'd still love her because she's my mother, and no matter what, she taught me how to love in the first place. I never got a reply, but a week later, my manager handed me a small package. Inside was a sweater, old, faded, one I used to wear in high school. There was no note, but I knew who it was from. That was her way of saying she'd read it. Her love had always been quiet, the kind that doesn't show up in words, but in gestures. Still, her silence became the loudest sound in my life. Every award I won, every concert I performed, a part of me wished she was there, watching from the crowd, smiling the way she used to when I first sang in front of our family. But she wasn't, and maybe she couldn't be. You see, in our culture, love like mine isn't something parents talk about. It's something they pretend not to see. It's the invisible line between respect and rejection, and crossing it means losing something sacred. That's what makes it so painful because it's not about hate, it's about love that's trapped inside fear. For a long time, I blamed myself. I thought maybe if I had just kept quiet, if I had played the role expected of me, I could have kept my family whole. But then I realized love that demands silence isn't love. It's survival. And I wanted to live, not just survive. So here I am, not to shock anyone, not to seek pity, but to tell the truth that's been sitting heavy on my heart. Because maybe someone out there is going through the same thing. Maybe there is another son, another daughter, sitting in a dark room somewhere, trying to choose between who they love and where they belong. And if that's you, please know this. You are not alone. And home, real home, is not a place that rejects your heart. It's where your heart is accepted as it is. For a while, I convinced myself I was okay, that I could live with the silence. That time would fix everything that she'd call eventually. But time doesn't heal silence. It stretches it until it starts to echo. Months went by, and every time I visited Daegu, I stayed in a hotel. I would pass by the street that led to our old house, the one with the plum tree by the gate, and I'd catch myself slowing down at the corner just to see if the light in the living room was still on. It always was. And every time I'd wonder if she was sitting there thinking about me, missing me the way I missed her. But I never went in because her last word still stood like a locked door between us. Fame became a kind of armor. People saw me smiling, performing, living a perfect life, and assumed I had everything figured out. But they didn't see the nights when I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights blur through tears I didn't even notice falling. People say loneliness is the price of success. But for me, it wasn't the fame that made me lonely. It was the distance between a son and his mother. He was the only one who saw through it, the only one who didn't look at me as V, but as the boy I used to be. When I'd come home from a shoot, exhausted, he'd already be waiting with soup on the stove and a quiet smile. He never asked for explanations. He never demanded to be chosen. He just stayed. And that kind of quiet love, it changes you. One night, while we were cleaning up after dinner, he said something I'll never forget. Do you think she stopped loving you, Tai? I didn't know what to say because deep down I knew the answer. Love doesn't stop, it just hides. It hides behind pride, fear, and the weight of what other people might think. I started to write again, not songs for the charts, but songs for myself, songs that no one would ever hear, lyrics that sounded like letters to her. Some nights I'd record them on my phone, my voice cracking halfway through, and I'd listen to them later, not because they were good, but because they were real. Music became my therapy. Every melody was a conversation I couldn't have with her. Every lyric was something I wished I'd said before she hung up that day. And then, one night, something strange happened. I was performing at a charity concert in Seoul. It wasn't a big event, small crowd, mostly families. In the middle of my set, as I started to sing one of those unreleased songs, the one about home, I looked out into the audience and there she was, my mother. I froze. For a second, I thought I was imagining it, but it was her sitting in the back row, hands folded on her lap, eyes glistening. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, tired. I couldn't stop singing. The music had to go on, but inside, I was falling apart. Every lyric suddenly became a message to her. Every note felt like a plea for forgiveness. And when the song ended, I saw her wipe her eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just stood up and quietly walked out. I didn't go after her. I couldn't, because sometimes love demands patience, not pursuit. For the next few days, I didn't hear from her. No calls, no messages. But then, one morning, there was a small envelope on my doorstep. No name, no return address. Just my initials TK, written in her handwriting. Inside was a note. It said, "You looked happy. Maybe that's what a mother should want for her son. I'm trying to understand. Mom." I read that letter at least 100 times. Each word felt like sunlight creeping through the cracks of a dark room. She wasn't saying she accepted everything, not yet, but she was trying. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. I called her that night. When she picked up, neither of us spoke for a moment, just silence, and then she said, "Taya, are you eating well?" I laughed, because that was her way of saying she missed me. That was her love, simple, cautious, but still alive. We talked for a while about small things, the weather, my dog Yontan, how my grandmother's health was holding up. We didn't mention him. We didn't talk about what happened. But that silence this time felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was space, space for understanding, space for love to grow again. After that, she started sending me messages once in a while, recipes, pictures of our family garden, even a video of the plum tree blooming again that spring. It felt like home was slowly finding its way back to me, one text at a time, and yet there was still a distance. A wall we both knew existed, but neither of us was ready to tear down. Until one day, I got a call from my aunt. She told me my mom had been admitted to the hospital. A mild heart condition, nothing too serious, but hearing those words sent me running out the door. When I saw her lying there, hooked up to tubes, looking fragile, something in me broke. All the pride, all the hesitation, it didn't matter anymore. I held her hand and whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry." She opened her eyes slowly and said, "Don't be. I'm the one who should have said that first." We didn't talk about the past after that. We didn't need to. Her hand in mine said everything words couldn't. And for the first time in years, I felt like her son again. A few days later, she was discharged. When I dropped her off at home, she invited me in. The house hadn't changed. Same wooden floors, same photos on the wall, same smell of home. She made tea, sat across from me, and said softly, "Tell me about him." I froze because I didn't expect her to say that. But she looked calm, not angry, not defensive, just open. So I did. I told her about the small things, how he made me laugh, how he reminded me to rest, how he never made me feel like I had to hide. And as I spoke, I saw her eyes soften as if she was finally seeing what I had always seen. When I finished, she nodded. She didn't say much, but before I left, she said, "Bring him next time." That sentence, just 3 words, felt like forgiveness. Not the kind that forgets the past, but the kind that chooses love over pride. When she said, "Bring him next time," I didn't know if she really meant it. It sounded almost casual, like an afterthought at the end of a long conversation. But it carried the weight of years of silence, tears, and distance. Still, those 3 words changed everything. They were an invitation back into the home I thought I had lost forever. The following week felt like walking through a dream I was afraid to wake up from. I kept asking, "Are you sure?" And I kept saying, "No, but I have to try." Because sometimes love means walking straight into uncertainty, not to prove anything, but to heal what was broken. The night before we went to Daegu, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying that phone call from months ago, her voice trembling as she said, "Don't ever come back home." And now she wanted to meet him. It felt like standing at the edge of 2 worlds, the one that raised me and the one that finally allowed me to be myself. When we arrived, the air smelled like rain. The sky was gray, and the streets I used to ride my bike on as a kid felt smaller somehow. He held my hand quietly, as if to remind me that no matter what happened inside that house, I wouldn't be alone this time. When we reached the gate, I stopped. The plum tree was still there, its branches heavy with fruit, just like the summer before everything fell apart. That sight alone almost brought me to tears. Home hadn't changed. Maybe it had just been waiting for me. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked at me, then at him. For a long moment, none of us said a word. Then she smiled, small, hesitant, but real. Come in, she said softly. Inside, everything was the same. The smell of tea, the ticking of the old clock, the photo of our family still hanging on the wall, me, my mom, my dad, and my grandmother, all smiling like we had nothing to fear. It was strange how the world outside had changed so much, and yet this place still felt frozen in time. She poured us tea. Her hands shook a little, and I could tell she was nervous too. He thanked her politely, his voice steady but respectful. I watched them, the two people I loved most in the world, sitting across from each other, trying to bridge a distance that had taken years to build. At first, the conversation was light. She asked about work, about my health, about Yuntan. Then, slowly, she started asking him questions: where he grew up, what kind of music he liked, how we met. He answered gently, never forcing warmth, just being himself, calm, kind, genuine. And I could see her softening with each answer. At one point, she looked at him and said, "You make him smile again." He didn't reply. He just nodded, and that was enough. After lunch, she asked if we could take a walk to the garden. It was the same garden where I used to chase butterflies as a kid, where she'd plant herbs and flowers every spring. She pointed to the soil and said, "I never stopped tending to it. I thought maybe someday you'd come back." Her voice cracked a little at the end. I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her. For the first time in years, she didn't pull away. That night when we left, she handed him a bag of homemade rice cakes. "It's not much," she said, "but it's sweet, like how I hope things will be between us." He smiled, and she smiled back. It was awkward, but beautiful. Two hearts learning a new language. Forgiveness. On the drive back to Seoul, I didn't say much. The rain had stopped, and the world outside looked freshly washed, like everything had been reset. He reached for my hand again, and this time I didn't feel afraid because I knew I didn't have to choose anymore. Home wasn't one place. It was wherever love could exist without fear. Weeks later, my mom called me again. She asked what I was doing for Chuseok, and before I could answer, she said, "Bring him too. Grandma wants to meet him." That's when I realized something had changed for good. The world hadn't suddenly become more accepting. The headlines hadn't shifted overnight. But inside our small family, a quiet revolution had begun. During Chuseok, we cooked together, all of us. Mom made her famous japchae. He helped slice vegetables, and I stood there watching them, feeling like I was witnessing a miracle in slow motion. There were still moments of tension, still long silences, but this time there weren't walls. They were bridges being built, one honest moment at a time. That night, after dinner, Mom called me to the kitchen. She handed me a small box wrapped in silk cloth. Inside was a family photo, newly printed, framed, and this time he was in it too. I looked at her, confused. She smiled and said, "If he makes you happy, then he's part of this family." I didn't cry right away, but later, when I was alone, I did, because those words meant everything I'd been waiting to hear. They were her way of saying She understood now that love isn't something to fear, it's something to protect. And in that moment, I realized my mother hadn't lost her son. She'd just found a new way to love him. From then on, life didn't magically turn perfect. People still talked. Some fans still speculated. Some headlines still whispered. But none of that mattered anymore because the one person whose acceptance I had prayed for finally gave it. He and my mom talk sometimes now about recipes or my bad sleeping habits or how I still forget to text back. Sometime when I visit Daegu, I'll find them in the kitchen together, laughing about something I don't understand. And I stand there quietly, grateful, because that's what healing looks like. Not grand gestures, but small, gentle moments of peace. Looking back, I've learned that forgiveness isn't about pretending the pain never happened. It's about deciding that love matters more than pride. And sometimes the hardest thing a parent can do is let go of who they thought their child would be and love them for who they truly are. If my mom ever watches this, I just want her to know thank you for finding the courage to love me again. And to anyone watching this who's been told, if you marry him, don't come home again. Please remember this. Home isn't where you're told to hide. Home is where your love for being real. It started with a photo. Just one photo. We weren't even trying to hide. It was a quiet afternoon, coffee, sunlight, laughter. But someone took a picture, and by the next morning, the entire world knew. At first, I didn't check my phone. I didn't have to. The silence from my team said enough. The way people avoided eye contact, the way the messages stopped, I could feel the storm before it even hit. When I finally opened social media, my name was everywhere, trending, exploding. Half the comments were love, half were disbelief, and the rest were filled with words I wish I could unsee. Some said, I'm proud of you. Others said, you ruined everything. There were rumors, edits, fan theories, some ridiculous, some cruel. I'd seen it happen to others before, but living it felt different. It wasn't just about fame anymore. It was about truth. For years, I'd lived in a world built on illusions. Every smile, every headline, every rumor we ignored. We learned how to control the narrative to keep our lives safe. But the moment that photo came out, everything safe disappeared. I remember sitting in the car that night, looking out the window as the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. It sat beside me, quiet. He didn't say it'll be okay. He just took my hand and said, whatever happens, we'll face it together. And for the first time that day, I could breathe again. The next morning, calls flooded in. Management, PR teams, close friends, even old acquaintances. Everyone had advice. Don't say anything. Post a clarification. Let the company handle it. But I knew what that really meant. Hide again. Pretend again. Erase the truth to protect the image. But how long could I live like that? How long could anyone? So I made a choice. A terrifying, liberating choice. I opened my phone, went to my notes, and began to write. It wasn't a statement. It wasn't an apology. It was just me. Love isn't a scandal. It's not something to be ashamed of. I've always sung about it. I've always believed in it, and now I'm just living it. I posted it without telling anyone, not even him. I just hit share, and for a few seconds, the world stood still. The reactions were immediate. Some fans cried. Some defended me fiercely. Others walked away. But through all that noise, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Because for the first time, I wasn't hiding. Of course, the headlines came next. Taehyung breaks silence. BTS star defies industry rules. Love over career. Every news outlet had their version of the story. Some wrote it beautifully, others twisted it into something else entirely. But what mattered most was the messages that came from people I didn't even know. A fan from Brazil wrote, "Because of you, I finally told my parents who I really am." Another from the Philippines said, "You made me believe love can be brave." Thousands of stories, thousands of voices. And in each one, I saw a reflection of my own. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been told they were wrong for loving differently. Everyone who'd been silenced, shamed, or forced to hide. The spotlight had always been heavy, but that day it became a shield, not to protect me, but to protect us. Of course, not everyone understood. There were still articles dissecting every gesture, commenters who said I'd betrayed something sacred, people who wanted the fantasy back, the version of me that never made them uncomfortable. But that version of me was gone. And honestly, I didn't miss him. My mom called again a few days later. I braced myself for her worry. Instead, she said, "I saw the news. You looked calm. I'm proud of you." That was all she said, but that was everything. It felt like the circle had finally closed. The same woman who once told me not to come home was now telling me she was proud. That's how love grows. Quietly, slowly, stubbornly, until it becomes unbreakable. The weeks that followed were a blur of interviews, meetings, and long nights. Some companies hesitated to work with me. Some brands quietly stepped back, but others stepped forward. And my brothers, my members, they stood beside me. No statements, no public displays, just quiet, unwavering support. They showed up when it mattered. One night, during practice, Namjoon pulled me aside. He said, "You did what most people never have the courage to do. You chose truth over comfort." And that meant more than any award I've ever received. Because in this industry, truth is the rarest thing. We build worlds out of perfection, but the cracks are what make them real. Months later, life found its balance again. The noise faded. People moved on to new stories, new scandals. But I stayed changed. I stopped trying to live up to an image. I started living for myself. And that freedom, it reflected in my art, my voice, my presence. Even fans said, "You seem lighter now." And they were right. Because when you stop hiding, you stop carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. I remember telling him one night, even if everything ended tomorrow, I'd still be grateful. He smiled and said, "It's not ending. It's just beginning." Now, when I look back at that photo, the one that changed everything, I don't see scandal. I see truth. I see courage. I see the start of a life I almost didn't have the bravery to live. So, to anyone watching this who's afraid of being seen, who's terrified of losing everything by being real, please know this. You're not losing, you're becoming. And there's nothing more powerful than that. Because the moment the world finds out who you really are, that's the moment you finally find out too. It took months for life to feel normal again. Or maybe it wasn't normal, maybe it was just new. The kind of new that doesn't erase what came before, but quietly builds over it, like sunlight slowly reclaiming a room after a long storm. I used to think peace was something that arrived suddenly, a moment of clarity, a big breakthrough, a single deep breath after chaos. But peace doesn't come like that. It comes quietly in the spaces between exhaustion and hope. In the mornings, you wake up and realize you're not scared anymore. After the public storm, we both kept things simple. No grand gestures, no interviews, no need to explain anything to anyone. We cooked, we walked Yontan by the Han River at night, our faces hidden under hoodies, our laughter echoing softly through the cold air. That was happiness. Not loud, not perfect, but real. I learned how to love again without fear. Not just him, but myself. Because for years, I'd lived for applause, for validation, for the constant reminder that I mattered. But the truth is, you can't build peace on the noise of others. It has to come from the quiet you make yourself. Sometimes I'd get messages from fans saying, I wish I had your courage. And I'd smile because they didn't see the nights I stayed awake, terrified that I'd ruin everything I'd worked for. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about moving forward while you're still afraid. It's about choosing authenticity over the comfort of silence. There were days I still felt exposed. Walking through the airport, seeing the cameras flash, hearing people whisper, I'd wonder if they were judging or just curious. But then I think about my mom, how far she'd come, and how she no longer saw my love as rebellion, but as a part of me, and suddenly the noise didn't hurt as much. Music became my therapy. Late at night, I'd sit in the studio with the lights dimmed, his laughter from the other room faintly reaching me. That sound, soft, unguarded, it reminded me why I started creating in the first place. I wrote songs I never thought I'd be brave enough to release. Not just about romance, but about identity, fear, forgiveness, and love in its most honest form. When those songs finally came out, something unexpected happened. The fans understood. They didn't run away. They listened, and they felt it too. Some said, "This is your most human work yet." And they were right, because for the first time, I wasn't hiding behind metaphors or stage lights. I was simply me. One day, while I was filming, my mom sent me a photo. It was Yuntan sitting on her lap with the caption, "He likes me now." I laughed so hard I had to pause the shoot. That moment, that simple message, meant more than any award or headline ever could. Because it wasn't just about her accepting him. It was about her learning to love me in all my truth. She visits us sometimes now. She brings side dishes, scolds me for skipping meals, and laughs with him like they've known each other for years. The first time she stayed overnight, she left a note on the kitchen counter. Love is loudest when it's quiet. That's something she would have never said before. It made me realize how love can evolve, how hearts can grow even after being broken. Film still feels strange sometimes. I'm still learning how to exist under the constant gaze while keeping pieces of my life sacred. But now I draw boundaries not out of fear but out of self respect because not everything needs to be seen to be real. Some love is better lived than displayed. People sometimes ask me, do you regret being honest? And my answer is always the same. Never. Honesty cost me some things. Privacy, approval, a version of perfection. But it gave me something worth far more: freedom. Freedom to laugh without guilt, to love without shame, to exist without apology. That's something no spotlight can ever take away. The industry has changed a little since then. There's more space for stories like mine, for artists who don't fit the mold, for people who live truthfully even when it's difficult. Sometimes I wonder if my journey made that space just a little wider for someone else. If it did, then it was all worth it. I've learned that love doesn't destroy you, fear does. And once you stop letting fear control your story, you start living one that's finally your own. Now, when people see me on stage, in interviews, in photos, they see calm, but that calm was earned. It came from walking through fire and realizing I didn't have to burn to prove my warmth. He once said to me, you don't need to be fearless, you just need to be honest. And he was right. Honesty is where love begins. So to everyone listening, whether you're hiding, healing, or halfway there, don't rush the journey. Peace takes time, forgiveness takes patience, and love, real love, waits for you to be ready. You deserve a life that feels like home. Not a home built from fear or expectation, but one filled with warmth, acceptance, and truth. I used to believe my mother's words were a curse. If you marry him, don't ever come back home. But now, I see they were the beginning of something greater. Because finding my way back home wasn't about returning to her house, it was about finding my peace within myself.